Welcome to Carousel. I'm your host, Marcel Soviero, and today we're going to do what we do every week on Carousel and go and find interesting people and talk about interesting things. Tonight I'm delighted to have with us poet and writer Nicole Callahan, who is the perfect guest for us tonight, given that April is National Poetry Month. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yes,
Marcel.
thank you for coming. Tell us a little bit about how you got started writing and writing poetry, and then we'll talk a little bit about your book and in general. So,
you know, I always loved writing growing up.
Yeah.
I was just naturally drawn to it.
Yeah.
And I didn't really turn to poetry until I was probably in middle school.
Oh, but still young. Yeah.
I suddenly just needed to write poems. I did some acting in high school, but then as things progressed, I just found more and more that I wanted to write my own words. And
Great.
It often came out in poetry.
In poems.
Yes.
Well, you are very talented in that regard, and you write poetry, you write nonfiction, you write personal essay. Tell us, is it a different process for each type of writing? Do you sit down at a different desk when you do poetry versus fiction versus nonfiction?
You know, I sit down on any desk I can find,
Yeah.
but I do find with poetry there's a lot less sitting.
Okay.
So with prose, there's a lot of chair time.
Okay.
A whole
So
lot
it takes
of
you
chair
longer.
time.
Yeah,
It takes
yeah.
you longer.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's longer form.
Yeah.
So what are some of the themes that you like to explore in your creative writing, and then we'll talk about your nonfiction?
I'm very into just the stuff of every day.
Okay.
Family, teaching. I teach, so my students often wander into my poems.
They do.
Saying wonderful things. I'm really interested these days, it seems like, in social media and the way Facebook and real life sort of come together.
Yeah.
So.
So to me, I've read the book several times, and for our audience, Nicole's poetry is very much like, for me, Billy Collins. It's accessible and wonderful, and it's the poems of everyday life in a certain way. So you published Superloop. When was that published? Pretty recent.
February of this year.
Of this year,
yes.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about Superloop. First of all, how did you come up with that title?
Well, the Superloop is a carnival ride that goes much like a carousel.
Yeah.
It goes around and around. And it's a ride I often ended up on at the Tulsa State Fair.
Okay.
Dangling upside down and fearing for my life and wanting more every time. The title of the book didn't come together until after the book was published, or was getting ready to be published. It was the very last thing that finally came through, and we went back and forth with several titles, many titles. And I remember I would text my mom, "What do you think of this? What do you think of that?" It's okay. And then the Superloop is a poem in the book. And I just sort of woke up one day and I had found the cover art. I have a coffee cup that I bought at the Union Square Market years ago. And I was staring at it, and it is the pattern on the book. And I looked on the bottom of the mug and emailed the artist to ask if I could use it for my book cover.
Goodness.
And so all of a sudden the loop and the superness all came together.
It all came together.
I decided on Superloop.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the title poem. What is that about?
It's about It's about a night riding a ride. I was with my stepfather, actually in Texas.
Okay.
And we were at a chili cook-off. And these poems are actually so old that I was young enough to wander off. I was probably smoking a cigarette and
right.
And riding
and
carnival rides.
Stuff. Yeah.
So it's about riding the ride and then losing my sandals on the swings
and about your stepfather.
And about my stepfather.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of family in the book, and your brother plays largely in the poem that hopefully, if you would like, you can read to us now, and then we'll talk about National Poetry Month. So let's hear Playing Dead.
Okay.
That would be great.
Okay, let's see.
From
Every
Super
time I hold this book, I get so excited.
I bet.
Because it's real.
It's a big deal.
It's
yeah,
real.
Absolutely. You are reading from the book.
Yeah. So this is called Playing Dead for my brother. August, and we are barefoot. I barely 5, him almost 6. He teaches me to spit watermelon seeds, and we conjure up plans to bring our parents back together. Kidnappings, alien abductions, broken washing machines. Anything that will allow us to live, the 4 of us, under the same roof. And now I am in yellow, an October flower girl for my father's new life. Now in red December, our mother divorces another man. But it is still August for us. We are out of seeds, so we lay on the sidewalk, my brother and I, and we play dead till almost dusk. We play dead because we believe if we are dead, our mother and father will stand above our bodies and hold each other till morning. At sunrise, a great hand will pull our Lazarus strings, and we will rise, my brother and I, and our parents will breathe and smile knowingly at each other. Dad will say, "How about a little IHOP?" The 4 of us will pile into the car and drive across town till we get to the International House of Pancakes, where the syrup flows like magic and the waitress brings extra whipped cream, and our parents will love each other and thank us over and over for playing dead so well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a beautiful poem.
Thank you.
So you've had the new book come out. You teach at NYU. Tell us a little bit now how you celebrate, if you do, National Poetry Month as a poet yourself and with your book out.
Yeah.
How is Poetry Month different than every other month?
You know, it's strange. Sometimes I say, oh, I don't like that, there's like just a month for poetry. Mm-hmm. But every year I'm enlivened by the poetry community. Mm-hmm. Many years ago, probably in the years I was writing these poems, almost 15 years ago, my friend Zoe and I, during National Poetry Month, went around sidewalk chalking poems just all over Brooklyn.
And
we actually organized an event to write a poem from Manhattan, the Manhattan side of the Brooklyn Bridge to Brooklyn. So we wrote a poem across the bridge in sidewalk
isn't that
chalk.
Wonderful?
And years have come and gone, and last year, with a group of people, actually she was included in this too, we wrote a poem a day. Many poets commit to writing a poem a day.
For the month
of April. Mm-hmm. And nowadays with the world of Facebook and Twitter, you can actually read everyone's, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There was a time when you just wrote a poem a day and kept it in
Right.
your notebook or in
Right.
your drawer.
Right.
And now you get to read. I'm following people actively, like, oh, I wonder what she wrote today.
Isn't that wonderful? So you're finding new poets to follow and things. Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
New York City, I imagine, has a lot of different poetry outreach during the month of April.
Yeah.
Anything specific at NYU or?
Not much at NYU, though. I've probably been showering my students with poems more than
more than usual.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. And But I've worked for an organization called Teachers and Writers Collaborative for a long time as well, and they have a lot of great outreach all year round. And then they're just fun readings, really electric, exciting readings. I sometimes feel this great need for a poetry revolution, and I want to make everyone sit and listen to poems all day. And so, for example, this Sunday I have organized a reading where my five of my favorite poets are coming together to read, and I love the idea that I get to sit and just listen to these poets read.
Do you introduce poetry to your children? I know you have 2 young children.
I do.
Yeah, so
I do. Yeah, my 5-year-old is a big fan of Galway Canal.
Oh, there you go.
And and my 2-year-old, actually, when she sees this book, she says, "Poems."
That's great. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that is terrific. You talked about the Teachers and Writers Collaborative. Now, that's not specific to poetry, right? That's
right.
That organization.
Teachers and Writers has been around for 40 years, and they just believe in putting writers in the schools to teach writing.
Right.
So essay writing, playwriting,
and this is from
fiction,
young people
through high school.
Through high school mostly. Yeah. Okay. I know my little guy is bringing poems in his pocket to school.
Yes, today's Poem in Your Pocket Day.
Poem in Your Pocket Day, which is perfect to have you here.
Yeah.
Did you write a poem in your pocket this year, or have your kids write poems in their pocket?
I did write a poem today.
Okay.
So I didn't put it in my pocket, but
it's tiny.
But the night is young. I can probably rip it out of my notebook and stick it in there for the train ride home. Yeah.
Great. I always like the poetry in your pocket piece.
Me too.
Tell us, you told us a little bit about that poetry requires kind of less sitting down time, but really you also write some serious nonfiction. This is the history of Henry River Mill Village here in Connecticut. That's got to be a different kind of writing, a different space in your mind. Tell us a little bit about that there's research.
Yeah, actually Henry River Mill Village is in North Carolina.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And my grandmother was raised in a little town called Henry River, my dad's mom. And it was the scene for District 12 of the Hunger Games.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
So it was, it's an abandoned town now, just basically a ghost town, but it had a brief life again when
with the movie.
when they came in to film the Hunger Games movie. But it's a town that had its own currency and ran its own electricity, had its own church, made its own moonshine. And I did this book with a woman, a 79-year-old woman, Ruby, who grew up in the village and lived, still lives about a quarter of a mile from the village.
Oh, wow.
So it was a wonderful collaborative project, and she taught me a lot, and I learned a lot, and it was a way to honor
explore
my
your
grandmother.
Heritage, right?
Yes,
yeah. Do you do research for your poems? I know, obviously, you're doing research for this. Do you
Not so much.
Okay, so because
they
that's
just
really
kind of
from
come
a
out of that.
a different
I do. I
part of you.
Wikipedia on occasion, but
What is your who are some of your favorite poets?
my favorite poets. I love Jean Valentine. I love Ruth Stone. I have a dear friend, Amy Hosig, in Brooklyn, whose poems just
Grab you.
Just grab me.
Right.
Me. Billy Collins gets me,
So for our viewers, who would you say to maybe start with if you're not reading poetry now? Who's a good starter poet?
I think Billy Collins, he's like the gateway drug to poetry.
Yeah,
right?
Oh, that's a soundbite. Yes, he certainly is.
You know, I mean, the lanyard, that is, I mean, to me, like the quintessential mother poem.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anytime a friend gives birth, I'm running over with the lanyard.
With the copy of the lanyard, yeah. That's great, that's great. And isn't it nice to sort of have poetry in your life that way, where you think to give someone a poem, you know?
It is.
As poets, we sort of see the world a little bit differently, I think, in terms of the detail and things. What would you say to a young poet today about the market, about being a poet? How is that in America? What?
I mean, you know, I don't know that there's a market, you know. It's either you love it and you do it and you hope and you do it and you love it and you hope and you do it and you hope and you love it. You know, these poems were written a dozen years ago, you know,
and now they're
didn't find a home until now, you know.
Right.
And now I'm writing new poems, and maybe it'll happen faster the second time around. But you know, it's not for fame and glory, or for teaching, or even for publication. I mean, it's really about a commitment to trying to figure yourself out, trying to figure the world around you out, you know, and seeing where it takes you.
So I think what you're speaking toward is passion. You either have a passion for poetry or you don't. You have to really love it, because there aren't all those rewards at the end of the process. There may not be publication. There may not be, you know,
there
money.
There certainly won't be money. There might not be publication.
Right. Yeah. So there's really that just, you know, never-ending passion for it. What are you working on now?
Mostly poems.
Some poems. So you're planning your next book?
I am. I just finished a collaborative poetry project with a friend, the same friend that
did the Brooklyn Bridge.
That we did the Brooklyn Bridge.
Oh, wow.
We wrote a series of poems back and forth as sort of teacher-student essay, prompt essay, which was really, it's much more exciting than it sounds. And we are teaming up with another Brooklyn artist who's doing cover art for it. Oh. And that's exciting. And then I have a book of poems that I had taken 10 years off of writing poems and just written fiction and nonfiction in those 10 years. And after my youngest daughter was born, something just turned in me, and suddenly I had to write poems again. And so the new poems that I'm working on, I think that collection will probably be finished up by the end of the summer.
And that's you as a different narrator, of course, than these ones that were written a bit ago. So are you taking on more of the issues of motherhood and the voice of motherhood?
I am, yeah. I mean, this one was very much for my mother.
Interesting.
And now I feel like I'm writing, you know, in many ways to my daughters.
To your child's, children, yes, you have 2 daughters. Well, that's a wonderful effort.
Yeah.
When you talk about going back and forth with your student, what sort of prompts are they? I'm curious.
Oh, well, she's not my student, but it'll say, it began as a poem, the poem was like, write an essay in which you consider the difference between birds and poems.
Oh my.
Something like that.
Okay.
And then she wrote back an essay about this, and then I sent her a revision poem that she asked her to revise that, and then she revised that, and then it became a real dialogue and a real awareness of each other's images and rhythms, and we just sort of went wild with it. And for several weeks we were just writing back and forth. Here's another one. Here's another one. Here's another one. Here's another one.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Would you see that? It sounds like you go back and forth with revisions. If you published that work, would you actually show revisions and things, or to show the process of writing?
Well, it will be all of the. I mean, they're called revisions, but they're more like
responses.
Poems, yes.
Okay,
responses.
poems and response.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds terrific.
It's fun.
Who were some of your influences as a poet? Who's been your mentor and guide in this passion of yours?
Jean Valentine was a
Okay.
big influence.
Okay.
George Economou, who's a poet who I studied with at the University of Oklahoma.
Okay.
He taught me a lot about revising, about being direct, being sincere.
Specific to poetry or in all your writing?
Yeah,
Okay.
just being true to the craft.
Mm-hmm.
My editor for Sock Monkey is a fellow Terrence Degnan, and he really, I think just him being an advocate of my poems helped me because I needed that. It was right when I was thinking like, oh, what have I done with my life?
Right, right.
You know,
Which
that he
writers
said,
think.
actually, you've done a lot with your life. So that's helped. You know, that was a real push into the direction of. I needed it at the time, and Scott Adkins, my publisher himself.
Sounds like you've had quite a few mentors. You're fortunate in that way. It's interesting because those folks would be have influence on your creative writing and things. Do you look to anybody specific for your investigative, more nonfiction writing, or people you admire in that regard?
You know, there are some writers who I really love. Katie Royfee, I think, is fabulous. Mm-hmm. I have a dear friend, Kristen Dombeck, who writes these essays that just blow your mind.
Yeah.
And I really, I've always admired how much she will research and research and research, just, till she's crazy.
Yeah.
So
she goes to the end of the earth to get the story down. Yeah. So. What outlets are there now for publishing poetry, in print and online?
I find that I think there's more opportunity than ever, really, especially because of the online world. Mm-hmm. There's some great online journals.
Okay.
Sixth Finch. I find myself going sort of racing to their site when a new issue comes out because I want to see what they've got going on. And there are several places that are like that. And I think that even just being able to Google someone you appreciate and find their poems right there.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting that you can in a minute see the whole archive of work of a single poet just by searching, really? I mean, that's very different than 10 years ago.
It is.
When you would buy kind of each book that somebody may have written, but now it's all there.
Yeah, and you would be, limited to what, the 8 books on the bookshelf.
On the bookshelf, exactly. I would say that's a big difference in publishing in general, of course. Are there websites that you use where you actually critique each other's poems and, I'm
involved in a small group of poets that one is a woman I went to graduate school with, and then just actually 2 of them I went to graduate school with. So every Monday we give each other an assignment and write a poem, and so most of us publish them on our blogs.
Okay.
And and they're there, and usually I take mine off after a week or 2. I just let it sit in the world.
And then
those 5 people read it. Who knows?
Right.
Maybe my dad will read it. But,
right.
I mean, it's a pretty limited audience. Mm-hmm. But we have a real community that I rely on for that. And I know that there are other more structured, larger communities. But because I have such a tight, small one,
core group there.
I don't even need to look further.
How do you find teaching poetry?
Well, I teach mostly essay writing. I teach in the expository writing program at NYU.
Right.
And though I do have my students do recitations quite a bit where I read them a poem and make them write it down.
Wonderful.
Which I think they love it. That's my hunch.
That's what we're hoping for.
They may be cursing me. But I mean, teaching writing is just Actually, I was out to dinner with a friend earlier, and she said, "What could you do if you could do anything?" I was like, "Well,
teach writing." That's great. Isn't that great to be doing what you would love to do?
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So I know for a lot of people, it's hard to do a second book that will equal the first. Do you have any of those sort of issues, living up to the first book and things like that?
No, I don't. I mean, I love this book for what it is. I feel very tender towards it. But to me, they're like the poems of a young woman who was very sweet, and I admire her.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel very far away from her. I mean, I've learned how to really write sentences since then, and I've written so much since these poems that I'm actually really looking forward. I feel a little bad because sometimes I'm like, I wrote these poems a really long time ago.
Right.
But
do you like the freedom of moving from a poem, which is obviously a shorter form, to more of an essay when you say sentences and things like that? Do you prefer one over the other, or is it just a different process?
Right now I prefer poems.
Okay.
I really do. But I think I would have said 5 years ago that I prefer essays. So.
And how does fiction fit in? I know you have a degree in fiction as well.
Fiction just doesn't really do it for me.
You're
anymore.
not working on that
personally,
actively.
I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No.
Yeah. Tell us now a little bit in terms of your background. You grew up in?
I am originally from North Carolina.
Okay.
Hickory, North Carolina, right down the road from Henry River Mill Village.
Right.
And we moved around a lot when I was growing up. We were in North Carolina, South Carolina, South Dakota.
Okay.
And then my mom and I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay.
When I was in middle school.
Okay. I guess just to sort of wrap things up then, does that moving around play into your writing at all? Did that enrich you in some way, or?
I think it probably did.
Yeah.
I went to 26 different schools.
Oh, that sounds like an essay.
Before I graduated from high school.
Wow.
So
you really moved around.
So yeah, we moved around a lot. So, I imagine that it did.
That it has some influence. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So what would you say to our audience? What's the easiest way to incorporate poetry into your life? Just a little piece of it.
Poetry in motion,
Poetry
looking
in
around,
motion.
Poetry on the trains. I feel like poems are popping up more and more places.
Exactly.
Even just looking at the sidebar and seeing a poem.
Right.
Or just finding one poem, because I feel like once you find one poem that you love, then there's a whole, I think they have,
the dominoes fall.
Yeah, the dominoes fall.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, we have to say goodbye, but thank you for being here with us, and good luck with your book.
Well, thank you.
And thank you again.
Yeah.